Hello, this is Chris Hanna,
And I'm Kevin Joel.
and we are here to make a video today about deconstruction. On one of our previous videos, Kevin and I pulled some clips from what was that, Zelf on the Shelf
Hmm.
and Nuance Ho, and how many people in the post-mormon world use the word deconstruction, and like it's some sort of new temple ordinance or something like that.
Hmm.
And I've actually been some of the issues I'm going to try to hit today, and I want to bounce through them quick because I'm trying to get more concise.
I'd like to bear my deconstructimony.
Yep, exactly. If you follow most of like ex-Mormon TikTok and all that stuff, it's just deconstruct, and I've been trying to make the point for a while that it's a misnomer the way they use it.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's been used that way so much and in so many different areas that it isn't a misnomer anymore. I mean, words evolve, but it's still a misnomer from what it originally was, which was this. It's kind of funny because it comes from Derrida, right?
Hmm.
And I kind of have this contention that Derrida was living this Andy Kaufman life. Like every single thing about his whole life was like a living joke, and I think he was purposely doing that because every ounce of him was. If you go read in detail what he says deconstruction is, he'll say this deconstruction, and I don't like that word. It's a method. It's not a method. It's of critical analysis. Well, it's not critical analysis of philosophical and literary language. Well, it's not really about,
Yeah.
and he was self-aware or almost playing this game that his whole entire methodology of 16 or whatever books using words, trying to make the claim that words don't mean anything, was
Yeah.
a big joke,
Yeah. So
and
joke's on you if you read all my books.
yeah, and this sort of like negate way is that, well, the joke is on you because like try to read them, and it's so funny because like I'll tell people I've read Grammatology by Derrida, but I didn't read Grammatology, first of all because it'd be crazy hard to read nowadays, but I read it when I was like 20 something and I didn't even know what I was getting into, and so like all the words went in my eyes, but I had a Derridian moment of being like, what the heck is this guy talking about? And then over time with a lot of these things, you start to get them better as you learn about them later. But the that sort of deconstruction of denial of everything, there's always this kind of thing of like the way we describe our thing is by saying what it's not. That's how we can define things.
Hmm.
But anyway, the method of critical analysis, philosophical and literary language, which emphasizes the internal workings of language and conceptual systems, the relational quality of meaning, and the assumptions implicit in forms of expression. So it's far more like structural post-structure. It's more kind of based in tearing down the text, reading of language, or
Yeah.
words, looking at words. And it was kind of Judith Butler who extended it out to. Some people say that Judith Butler's use of deconstruction came from her misunderstanding deconstruction, but she 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 I don't know what Judith Butler's whatever, but the change they changed it into
Look at you using
yeah.
the proper pronouns.
Changed it into kind of like a form of blurring of categories, which you see especially in queering. But queering isn't just any old category. You can queer, um, I don't know, whatever category, but of course you obviously see them try to queer at most in gender. But in that same book, Gender Trouble, that she queered gender, that maybe you've gotten like the whole world to do this like Mott and Bailey game of
Hmm.
they could they could queer the concept of gender and say gender and sex are two different things, and they don't interact with each other, which is a complete lie. As um, kind of it's been borne out by all sorts of different psychological studies, and beyond that, that's just not true. But they act on each other. That's the bottom line of it. But in that same book, just a chapter later, they went ahead and said, we'll just go ahead and deconstruct sex too. So everybody kind of uses that as like sex and gender are different. Don't you know? It's doctors talked about this.
Yeah. Right.
We're talking doctors, and academic doctors talked about it, and um, sure, you know.
Haven't you read the Idea Laundered Papers?
Yeah, idea laundering, that comes from Brett Weinstein, but it's an
Yeah.
awesome idea of
Yeah, it is.
the concept that in these schools they just started pumping out papers, and then you got other ideologues to review the papers and then pass the papers, and then just through like a whole process
It's
of
just
everybody.
smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, it's just doing like this big groupthink process to put it together.
Right.
I'll go ahead and put this in now. Antonio, I mentioned the other couple podcasts that common sense is bad news, and I mentioned Marcuse a lot, but it really goes back to Antonio Gramsci, who was the person who started talking about hegemonic culture, hegemonic discourse, and that common sense and status quo are part of that hegemonic.
Yeah. The first conversation we had, I mentioned that it was kind of a form of groupthink, and I don't know if I was clear, but what I was saying is I just noticed that the woke are always guilty of everything that they're accusing.
Yeah.
So when they talk about, I mean, they might not say common sense, but I mean, it's when you get into the wokeness, there is a woke common sense.
Yeah.
And that's actually that's being injected into our culture right now. And that's I didn't clarify that when I said that. And so
Well,
I went back and listened to that video, and I was like, oh, I see where people could do like.
Well, in that moment, I was getting into the concept of they just think general common sense is bad because it's part of
Right,
white
because
Western hegemony.
Yeah.
You also made the point that it's like sometimes this general common sense can turn into something that seems like groupthink or something like that. And your idea laundering is an example of them group thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Or, and
well, and they're guilty of trying to institute their own hegemony right now.
Beyond that, Flip and I contended in the podcast yesterday that they are hegemonic now. They're the hegemony.
Yeah, correct.
And have been for a
They're
while.
the ones
It's kind of funny that if you go reading any of Marcuse or even for Foucault or whatever, and they start talking about discourses and hegemonic discourses and the powers that be having biopower and all this stuff, it just really starts sounding funny and not making sense when you realize the hegemony is flipped.
Yeah.
And it's.
I mean, we haven't been canceled yet, but I mean, as soon as we top 1,000 views, maybe we might be on our way to getting canceled.
So, John DeLynn, he posted this a couple years ago.
Angry Johnny.
So he posted this thing about ContraPoints, and I'm going to get into this other video about ContraPoints by this other creator named Morgoth. But there was this video that ContraPoints made about Jordan Peterson.
I always love I just love how the way Morgoth pronounces ContraPoints.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to play some Morgoth.
Yeah.
But, the Lynn, whenever he, I'm going to make the case a little bit more later, but whenever he gets Deconstructor or runs into Deconstructionism, I feel like he kind of just doesn't understand it, and all he can do is go, "Oh, brilliant! Oh, it's brilliant! That's just so brilliant." And I don't think Deconstruction is brilliant.
You do a good impression, by the way.
Brilliant, super, brilliant, super racist. You're going to cause harm. Super racist, brilliant. So he posted this video. I hadn't ever seen him talk.
People are dying.
Peterson. Yeah,
that was John Larson, but
anybody will say that inside. People will die, right?
Yeah.
Yesterday, Flip and I talked a bit about him bringing up Jordan Peterson with somebody I know personally, Lance Allred, and him saying Jordan Peterson was co-opted by the right, and we need somebody else who's not co-opted by the right. And so every single thing I've ever seen John DeLynn kind of mention Jordan Peterson is kind of sneeringly, you know what I mean? Of course, it's going to be sneeringly. He hedged on it a little bit yesterday, but he posted this ContraPoints video that everybody in the world thought was such a brilliant video. And ContraPoints, for as bad as I say most of the ex-Mormons are about being about deconstruction or that sort of a concept, is that ContraPoints is very good at actual deconstruction, kind of, reviewing like a word through history. Morgoth's gonna make the point of that, but let's go right into Morgoth. This is maybe the longest clip we'll do today, but it's only like 3-4 minutes.
Okay.
This whole video is good. People should watch the whole video because he likens the deconstruction into stuff that happened in Afghanistan. But I'm just going to cover the early ContraPoints part.
distracted by two trends, which at first
Oh man, I always put everything on double speed. Everybody should listen on double speed. I was making the case. Listen on double speed. It's better.
seem to have nothing to do with each other, but on closer inspection seem to have everything to do with each other. The first was the American evacuation from Afghanistan, and the second was my attempt to wade through a 1 hour and 45-minute video by one of the flagship YouTube channels of the left, ContraPoints. Without saying that I wasn't watching ContraPoints for any sort of enjoyment, it's more that I want to know what the other side are up to. ContraPoints has been celebrated by the American mainstream and seems to sum up the zeitgeist as the establishment would like it. ContraPoints is sophisticated enough to appeal to the intellect of policy wonks in the State Department or presenters of CNN, but it still has that air of being non-mainstream because it's still on YouTube. As my friend the distributors pointed out, ContraPoints is to the mainstream left what Jordan Peterson was to the mainstream right. The difference is the mainstream left is hegemonic.
He makes that point, and so many
Yep.
people might think Jordan Peterson got so popular that, like, ContraPoints, especially the mainstream left, I don't know if I could say it was bigger, but definitely more accepted by the hegemonic media.
Yeah.
And if you go all over BreadTube, which is what you call like leftist YouTube,
Right.
ContraPoints is a god, although this person's gone through the same amount of canceling that's only going to ever happen to. There was even at some point that the whole channel got deleted for something, and I lose track of which ideas went against the values and made people flip out. But you're around any sufficient amount of time in that world of purity culture, you'll get canceled in some way or another. But this guy, and this is something I should mention too, is like there's all sorts of people, and I listen to their critiques and think they're good critiques from maybe like the right or more conservative religious people who have all sorts of critiques for Peterson. I know Kevin's listened to a bunch of them too. We like and mention Peterson, but when we hear like the critiques of the people, we hear the critiques from the people from the left and the critiques from the people on the right on him, and there's good points. There's good points by, he mentioned the Distributus. The Distributus is a good channel. He's Catholic, but he kind of gets into some of that NRX movement, the Mencius Moldbug movement, which is kind of some people who understand the entire postmodern world and have read and gotten through the whole entire thing, and then have doubled back into pre-modernism. Like,
Yeah.
almost some people say it's like almost in a wrestling kayfabe way. Other people say that they're being honest or something like that. But
Yeah.
like Mencius Moldbug talks about wanting to return to monarchy, stuff like that. But they have decent critiques of Peterson, and Peterson's.
Well, they understand the way that the left works. How the left, to move the goalposts, usually has to be an overt movement to be able to move the goalpost, and I think that they understand that enough to be able to say, "Listen, we've got to counteract," that kind of thing.
ContraPoint sums up the American moment of the present era. The video, which I genuinely found a slog, was called Envy.
That's what I don't. People love it. I agree. Yeah. I think it's a slog. It's got all sorts of aesthetics and stuff like that in it, but it really.
And explored the concepts of envy and jealousy from many philosophical and historical angles. But most of all, of course, it was from the perspective of a very wealthy trans person for the YouTube algo, who probably knows a lot about envy and has many people envious of them, which ContraPoints would acknowledge.
But this is the it's shaping up right there that we're actually talking about like the more academic deconstruction. You know what I mean? It's deconstructing envy, deconstructing the word across time to. I guess I'll get to it here, but it's also done through a transgender person doing all sorts of aesthetics around that in the meantime. So that's part of what Delin or whatever might think is brilliant about the video that takes down Peterson. That the Peterson video, there's all sorts of Hegelian games going on, like pretending to get it and to be going along with it, and then doing some subterfuge, like acting like Peterson's daddy and gonna have some sexual relation with Peterson, all while listening to and agreeing with some points of Peterson. You know, deconstruction.
But then there's what SpongeBob SquarePants has to say on envy. What about the ancient Greeks? ContraPoints had fun repeatedly breaking the fourth wall and addressing the audience. In other words, stepping outside the format and looking back in from a meta perspective, and then continuing on with an exploration of Nietzschean slave morality and how it naturally produced envy. Or was it self a creation of the envy of the weak, while at the same time calling Nietzsche an angry incel?
That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. It's like I get Nietzsche's point. I get Nietzsche's point. I see what he's saying about resentment. This incel, he's an incel. You know, what I mean, that's this Hegelian sort of game,
right.
but it's also that's deconstruction. You know.
In other words, what we're getting is a deconstruction of the concept of envy, and at the same time, a deconstruction of the way envy was conceptualized across cultural forms. And at the end of it all, after long 1 hour and 45 minutes, what's left over is nothing. There's no satisfaction.
I think so that's how it does like break out into culture, like cultural forms. You know, you could do like a deconstruction of Mormonism. It's just when most people are talking about it on these TikTok things, it's not that form of deconstruction that they're doing. It's just you're falsifying or you're questioning your own ethics or morality or you know.
Faction, no catharsis, no meaning derived, and no conclusion, no happy ever after. What you have is narratives which give meaning to the world in tatters, but nothing to replace them with. Imagine a beautifully crafted violin which, with the right musician, can express something heavenly in music.
So it's my contention if it's perfect academic deconstruction or just criticism, you know, this sort of thing's still happening. But deconstruction really is good at doing it. But pure criticism also deconstructs the violin, you know.
Which is kind of in a way pretty funny, like especially when you're talking to like a Mormon audience. When if anybody's ever seen the old church movie, The Touch of the Master's Hand, that video, yeah. So it's kind of like the opposite of
exactly. That's such a good point.
The touch of the deconstructor's hand.
Perfect.
The question then arises as to why the violin is so special. What makes it a violin? So then it has its strings snipped and the varnish melted, the wood sawn through and the neck snapped. Eventually, you may have found the answers. You may understand why its timbre was perfect and why that particular design absorbed sounds or reflected them so perfectly. The problem is you don't have a violin anymore. You've just got junk. But all along the way, you've also had the temporary thrill of destruction.
Temporary thrill of destruction. Oh, it feels so good to be a revolutionary.
Yeah.
Do many people want to admit it's all just you're only doing it for freedom fighting, whatever. There's no joy or thrill in aiming down and burning things up.
Yep.
Of course, right. You're finding meaning in destroying.
Yeah, exactly.
Of breaking apart that which was. This is, of course, the modern left incarnate. Pick whatever issue you like. Identity, ethnicity, religion, sex, class. It doesn't really matter. They've already broken it apart and rendered it useless. They've reduced almost every concept you can imagine to junk and felt intelligent while they do so. It's one thing to
feeling intelligent while you do so.
Yeah. This is kind of just another interesting take on what we talked about on our last video and grifting off the void. So when they deconstruct things, that's exactly what, you know, they're leaving a vacuum that they can totally grift off of and capitalize on.
Yeah, there's one of the, I think actually Carden said it in a Midnight Mormon video that he pointed out that it's then you can replace it with what you want to replace it
Yeah,
with. And
exactly.
my actually next two videos that we're not going to watch, I'm just going to point to them maybe a little bit.
Yeah, maybe
So how
grift's
that's
not the right word. It's not just not like a monetary gain, but it's a power gain.
Yeah, it's not. Well, so we'll get to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have this on the periphery of the intellectual life of the nation or the civilization or the culture. But it's quite another when it becomes the dominant and all-encompassing ideology, because eventually
You are dominant. These ideologies are dominant now. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
You're not
Yeah.
the underdogs. You're not the freedom fighter underdog heroes.
Yep.
You are the empire, not the rebels.
Mm-hmm.
the civilization ceases to have a reason to exist or to justify itself in any meaningful way. What this covers up, for a time anyway, what it uses to cover this up is pomp and spectacle.
So just going to these next videos. This is a recent video, and there's been a million of these. I've been watching this back, and people talk about things like Gamergate or going all the way back to Anita Sarkeesian, which is actually one of the first areas where I started button heads with Lindsay Hansen Park as well. There was this whole thing about Anita Sarkeesian coming to UVU, and Anita Sarkeesian was one of the first persons that I started noticing there was a grift in activism, like a real big time type grift in activism.
Right.
But part of what they wanted to do is push themselves into some of the first places. And there's been this cultural movement, like Brett and Heather Weinstein had this situation happen with them at Evergreen. And people keep wanting to say that this stuff's going to stop here. It's not going to go to the next place. It's not going to go to the next level,
Right.
And one of the first areas, like I joked on the Midnight Mormons that I ended up in HR. The reasons I know about this stuff is I ended up in HR and literary grad school. Those are some of the first two places where the fangs of the spider bite, or where the corpse of the Western body is found. But they were some of the first areas, like the idea laundering. The first place they found out that they could wedge themselves into was literary grad school, and then they started idea laundering there. And then there's papers like, listen to James Lindsay's podcast on the virus, that they are intentionally a virus and view themselves as a virus. They tried to move and take over all the other departments, and it got up to a point where they are pushing into STEM. There's so much of that going on. It's unreal right now. You couldn't even start to show all your tweets on it.
Oh yeah.
But one of the first areas outside of academia they started trying to push into was obviously, Hollywood, and comics was one of the first areas. There's a great channel, Diversity in Comics, which is now called Comics Matters. He's been covering for years and years and years how the woke took over every single comic story to deconstruct it.
Yep.
And part of what well, let's listen to critical thinker for a second.
First video,
I might have to edit a word from him, but
why modern movies suck a few weeks back, I kind of pictured it as a one-shot deal, a chance to vent my spleen about something that's been irritating me for some time now. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to realize that the problems with filmmaking today are bigger and more complicated than I could tackle in one video. A series was needed, a series that could methodically tackle each problem in turn, shedding light on just how modern writers are and exposing their misdeeds for all the world to see. And when it comes to behaviour in modern films, there's few more egregious offences than bringing back established, well-known heroic characters beloved by generations of moviegoers and systematically degrading, discrediting and destroying not just who they are now, but everything they once were, usually in a desperate attempt to elevate some cheap, soulless carbon copy replacement that lacks everything which made the original so appealing in the first place. It's a cheap thing for any writer to do, and yet it seems to be happening at an alarming rate these days. Modern Hollywood likes to refer to this process as deconstruction.
So he goes off with a few examples, but the examples are endless. I mean, you can think of an IP, and it's been done to it. I mean, one of the more recent ones was He-Man. And
Oh yeah.
all the drama with that. It was it was done in Star Wars. If you think about, I remember my sister-in-law was talking about why was that scene in the movie about Luke not wanting to fight, but then all of a sudden he's just drinking milk from a it's deconstructing him. You know, it's
Green alien boob milk.
like what I said, ContraPoints is going to try to like say, oh, Jordan Peterson has some points, and then like show like some clip like they're having sexual relations or something like that.
Yeah.
And those things are intentional and purposeful, the imagery of it. But then beyond that, the general story, as you pointed out, is we're going to show these old samples of the old hero and deconstruct them, show that they're kind of actual pieces of crap and
Yeah.
not good at anything.
And
And then you bring in the replacement, which
yeah.
is, and there's symbolism in all that, which is what Jonathan Pajot covers so well here. If this video here, I'm not going to show any clip of it, but he covers so well. Like these are some of the earlier movies where people even kind of liked them, because everybody kind of caught onto the game, and people don't like it so much anymore. They started noticing it happen and everything. But in movies like Wonder Woman or Logan, those movies are movies. Think about the movie the Mad Max reboot.
Mm-hmm.
In each one of those movies, there's like they're more expertly done because they get real clunky in other areas, like the Ghostbusters of 2016 or stuff like that. But those movies do like a version of replacing the old hero with the new hero, and them stepping down and them being useless and them not or needing to die or move on. You know, forget the past.
Kill it if you have to. The iconic line of Star Wars.
And this stuff, it's ideological. Yeah.
Totally.
Star Wars and or now. It
pissed me off, you know. I about walked out of that movie when they said that.
So some of this stuff is people talk about get woke, go broke for years. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. Like the first Wonder Woman is successful, and those other movies, the movies that Pajot talks about are successful here, but they're also kind of some of the earlier versions that are a bit more subtly done. But one of the things Critical Drinker even points out is like in the Rocky movie, it does it. Like the whole reason I was a huge Rocky fan is the things about this guy doesn't give up. He keeps going. He keeps going. And Critical Drinker points out that in the newer versions where we're going to put him down and we're going to show that he's a guy who just gave up on his cancer fight now, you know what I mean?
I mean, think about what made those previous heroes like what they were. They actually did go through something similar. They just overcame it. They didn't just give up. And that's the thing, is they're taking it just in the deconstructive way to, you know, no, he's not gonna fight. He's just gonna give up and he's gonna die.
Yeah, and he was always a piece of crap anyway. He's from his family.
Then it shows Luke Skywalker's cloak just in the wind, and he's gone.
His guy just disappeared.
You're a deadbeat hero now, you know.
And the examples are endless, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you were talking about the hero's journey, and they're taking down the hero. And one of the concepts, another good channel is Nerdrotic, and a bunch of different people who are in the same world of examining this stuff and watching their old things get taken over. They point out something that Nerdrotic he calls it the hero's journey, and it's that a woman, the new character, the man needs to step aside, and the woman just needs to figure out that she was always the best. She doesn't need to go through like a process of learning or becoming better or growing. It's just figure out that you are always the best and great as you are.
I bypassed the compressor.
Yeah, and if you see that, or like think of the big one for a long time was Captain Marvel, and she was always perfect. She just had to figure out men were holding her down from her perfection.
Yes,
and that's kind of what the things that are pointed out in those other videos too. The men have to figure out. He shows it in propaganda and symbolic ways. The visuals of that the men have to step down and elevate the women, and some of those even more expert movies do it in more subtle imagery ways.
Right.
So now we get to this, and one of ContraPoint's big thing is deconstructing the hero of the West, the incel, deconstructing the Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson comes out, and all these young men start kind of latching onto him because they realize that some people weren't holding up the common sense banner, and Peterson kind of like stuck his flag down as one of the person who's going to say, I'm going to stand up for these old Western values. And so of course many people come at it with a tantrum, but some person like ContraPoints sees a moment to do a deconstruction, you know. And so the whole video is just about kind of acting like you get it and then deconstructing it. But let me
So would deconstructing deconstruction be considered white male fragility?
That's a good question, because like any sort of pushback is fragility. But if you were doing it from a left-wing side, like something like Adorno did, they got into this whole concept of we got to negate the negation and negate the negation. You know, it just gets more and more nihilistic if you're going in that direction. But they always have this belief, as Flip and I talked about yesterday, is that if you destroy it, the utopia will come. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get into hers. There. I don't know. I think it's hers.
She looks like her to me.
Yeah. Well, look how I'm open. You know, whatever. So let's listen. This is just a part of it, because like I kind of described the larger video, but I'm gonna glom onto a point here.
Yeah.
Stinking double speed, man. Listen on double speed. Double speed's better. I keep saying that, but
should be on board with. You could even argue that Marxism is an extension of Enlightenment philosophy, with its concern for human progress, science, and liberty. I think a lot of people like listening to Jordan Peterson talk about the Western tradition, but they don't seem to like reading any of it themselves. If you did read it, you'd find a surprising diversity of thought that doesn't reduce to Judeo-Christian values. Much of Plato's political dialogues are concerned with arguing against cultural relativism, suggesting that, far from being an invention of postmodernity, it was actually a pretty popular worldview among ancient Athenian pederasts. Our favorite Enlightenment philosopher, David Hume, famously said that reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions, literally feels over reals. And meanwhile, his contemporary, the Marquis de Sade, was advocating the abolition of morality, filling the churches with scat porn, and ushering in a reign of untethered sexual perversion so decadent and depraved, I'm not even allowed to talk about it on YouTube.
yeah,
Sounds like postmodernism to me.
Yeah, well, that's the point. That's the point that you're making, is that these Enlightenment things sound like postmodernism, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But the point, the real actual point of the Enlightenment is that it was a time frame where you were allowed to think and explore as you wanted to. But a lot of times, colloquially, when we're talking about holding on to Enlightenment values, we're talking about holding on to like empiricism, you know, a type of epistemology, something that came out of the Enlightenment, but it's just one aspect of it. Or like logical positivism, which is a part, you know, of, you know, it's related to empiricism. But if you get into any one of these philosophies, it's kind of one of the things I was talking about the other day. If you go down the row of empiricism and just read all these people, that person pretending like they've read all of this, no, you haven't. And very few people have, but some people have, and they're usually kind of institutional philosophers who they'll just hedge on everything so much you almost can't even talk to them.
Right.
But there's a couple podcasts I listened to for years. There's one called Partially Examined Life and Very Bad Wizards. These were some academic level philosophers who were just kind of generally going over a ton of different philosophers. So through that, I got through a bunch of these different philosophies. I've read a bunch of them myself. I've been at this stuff for 20 years. I'm nowhere near the start. You know, you can just go forever, you know.
Yeah.
But this empiricism, as you go down the row of empiricism, you'll see that the empiricism leads to things like phenomenalism, which is technically what subjective idealism. You know, it's like the more and more people think about it, it starts getting postmodern. You know, no matter what, they kind of start to encounter the problem of epistemology. No matter what, they run into it, and they start running into it. The Enlightenment thinkers start running into it. This is part of the problems of philosophy. But the real concept, the actual concept of the Enlightenment, is that you are allowed to think and explore what you want. So of course Marx could come out of Enlightenment,
right,
guys, or whatever, and that the best ideas are supposed to supposedly win out. But yeah, most people, when we're talking about holding on to things, we're talking about things like scientific method, or empirical evidence, or rationalism, skepticism, just kind of like an epistemology that's based more in reality, logical positivism. But logical positivism started getting its biggest critiques from phenomenology. It just comes out of empiricism. So like that's what I'm talking about, is like it doesn't even take getting to the postmodernists to start deconstructing the stuff,
Right.
but that brings me to this person. I'm gonna take some weird credit right here. I was telling Kevin about it. I think I sparked this video. I'm at least one of the persons who did. And this is a famous video in BreadTube and LeftTube.
Mhm.
This person came out critiquing Jordan Peterson, saying he didn't understand postmodernism at all. And Peterson never claimed to be some postmodernism expert, but nobody needs to be a super expert in stuff to really kind of start getting that it's boogly googly, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
You can get as nuanced as you want and go forever, and there's always another person that you should have read or should have thought about. Or I was just reading a bunch of stuff by Deleuze a couple of weeks ago, and anyway, this whole video comes out. So Peterson, I mentioned to this guy that Peterson stood on the shoulders a bit of this other guy, Stephen Hicks. I believe Stephen Hicks wrote one of the best books to read about postmodernism, to figure out and learn what postmodernism is, right? In the entirety of BreadTube, they all glommed onto this video of the critique of Hicks. That I tell you, I sparked it because I told this guy, you need to look at Hicks, Peterson standing on Hicks. And then he had a back and forth with me, like, who's Hicks? And he didn't know who Hicks was till I told him who Hicks was. And I pointed out some of the videos from Hicks, and I even pointed out some like YouTube videos from Hicks, and I showed the book to him. So this video comes out, and the whole entire video, I haven't listened to it in a while. One of the dishonest things was talking about if this was properly idea laundered or not. I love that you brought that up, because it's like, has this gone through proper peer review yet?
Yeah.
And one of the things about like a book written for the layman is they don't usually go through peer review. It's a dishonest point. Books written for laymen aren't put through that rigor. But even then, nowadays, that peer review process has gotten so corrupted by the idea laundering that Jonathan Haidt talks about, that these universities just get kind of overrun with people with certain politics.
Yeah.
Especially these types of areas. Anyway, this video here, one of the things that it tries, one of the main things, and you'll hear this brought up anytime somebody tries to say, read Stephen Hicks, they'll say, Stephen Hicks says that Kant started postmodernism. That's the exact same point that Goofus in the last video was just saying.
Yeah.
It's, wow, these Enlightenment ideas sure started getting anti-Enlightenment, counter-Enlightenment.
Right.
Hicks says it. It's the exact same thing.
Right.
And it's the point that Hicks already carefully made in his book. He's like making this point that Hicks already addressed in the same book. So these people try to use it as an example for why to read Hicks. And you can hear any sort of left person, because they've watched this video, they think they can skip reading Hicks because, he says Kant, and they're just regurgitating this.
Yep.
He says Kant is counter-enlightenment. Yeah, ContraPoints does too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? ContraPoints says Hume is counter-enlightenment.
Yep.
And those are just kind of like pulling out little points of them. But Kant was counter-enlightenment in some ways. Kant got into this stuff called the noumenon, which is the whole entire thing is about perception. Just relies inside of your brain, and the thing out in the world, you can't really tell if it's there or not. It's just what your senses are guessing or feeling at, so you don't know if any of it's true. Does that sound like the start of postmodernism to you?
Oh, yeah.
It does to me. And beyond that, you can look and read directly from the writings of Lyotard, that Lyotard jumped off, like directly references Kant as his jumping point.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so it's such a dishonest bullcrap thing, but any sort of like a lefty person will regurgitate this and think that they can just wave off the argument.
Yeah.
ContraPoint says they haven't read very much of Western stuff. You guys haven't read it, and all you've gotten is like some talking points of how to wave off something like this.
Yeah.
So I remember at one point years ago, I saw Lindsay Park, and I'd first shown her Peterson. I was the one who showed her Peterson's points in a concept that I was going to show her and John Larson some counter ideas to some of the stuff that they were saying. And they never got back to me on that. I
Mhm.
don't know if Larson was even in on it or if it was Lindsay's idea. But then sometime later, I saw her all of a sudden popping up. You remember that debate sort of that Peterson had with that lady from GQ?
Yeah. Yep.
They show that whole video, and that lady is so funny because Peterson kind of talks about that lady's feminism, and that lady's since gotten divorced and all that stuff. Is kind
Yeah.
of funny to
Yeah.
to
The second most famous
yeah. So
video next to Kathy Newman.
yeah. So she mentions on that one, her whole thing is like, this Peterson stuff isn't new. It's not new. So why even listen to him? He's just talking about old man stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And that was actually the day that I stopped. I probably should have kept following just to see it, but that's the day I stopped following Feminist Mormon Housewives, because I told her, you never got back to me or talked to me about any of the sorts of stuff, and I just see all this time later that you just have this bonky, weak critique of it, and I'm done, you know. But anyway, yeah, this is the creme de la creme of why you can just wave off Hicks, and it's a crap, because Hicks himself already debunked it in the book. Listen to the book; you can get it online. So getting onto this, Kevin and I on our first podcast that we never released covered this video in its entirety, and we should go back over it in its entirety. But I wanted to start from here.
Everyone, those who adopted this new vision of the world left behind the skepticism of postmodernism.
Come on.
Double speed.
They were now enlightened, awakened to the truth, filled with certainty about the way all of society, all systems, and all interactions really worked. They could see it all. They were woke. The way that white person complimented her black colleague on good work, that wasn't just praise. It was white supremacist surprise at a black person having intelligence and capability. The way that man is sitting, with his knees pointing outwards, this has nothing to do with the shape of men's hips and their external testes. That's patriarchal entitlement to take up more space than women and crowd them out of public areas. What about the speaker who began with, "Ladies and gentlemen," that's not a simple formal customary address. It's the erasure of non-binary people and an oppressive discourse that forces binary concepts of sex and gender onto everyone, making the world hostile to trans people and increasing their risk of violence or suicide. When one is woke and can see and feel the oppression everywhere, it becomes one's moral duty to call it all out, ban it and deplatform, punish and cancel the perpetrators. The rest of us are at best still asleep, or at worst willfully ignorant and refusing to wake up. The woke movement claims to be progressive, but its origins are more than half a century old and based on faulty and unproven scholarship. Surely we can find a better and more modern basis.
So part of why I pointed to that is an answer to that thing. Like I said, Lindsay Hanson's deconstruction of Peterson is that this is old stuff, and you and I both know. Kevin and I saw Peterson live in Salt Lake together, and so many people, like even critiques from the right of Peterson, have been like, he just talks about common sense, and yeah, obviously that stuff needs to be reaffirmed, you know, and that's what Peterson's done is just kind of rehash.
That's why he gets millions of views.
Yeah, and I would argue on some level that's been some of the failure of the right or the conservatives over the years of not just stand up for it, but articulating whys, the whys of the Chesterton fences.
Yeah,
and we've all got to get a little bit better, even the ones we don't understand yet. We've got to figure them out. Like we got to figure out and explain the whys of the Chesterton fences better. But part of why I also pointed out this video is that after the deconstruction happens, something has to fill it in, and this is talking about what fills it in. I mean, those critical thinker videos or critical drinker and the Pajak videos are say we got to replace it with our new progressivism or our futurism type stuff. And this is kind of talking about how what needed to fill in the void, what needed to grift off the void was after the postmodernists tore it down, the wokeism could step in to that void, right? So a couple years ago.
Oh, back on. Sorry. Was that me?
No, I didn't notice anything.
Oh, okay, good.
A couple years ago, DeLynn got somebody who had gotten a person to record a general authority give answers to the CES letter.
Right.
And maybe some Mormons aren't familiar with the CES letter. Probably if you're a Midnight Mormon fan, you're a fan of the CES letter. Or I'm not a fan of somebody who's aware of the CES letter.
Right.
And it's just basically an accumulation of all the empirical questions about Mormon history, right? And gosh, it's so hard to empirically answer all these different questions. But in that video, everybody's watching live because all these like ex-Mormons were like licking their chops, like saying, "Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, we got them. They're going to have to be held to fire to these empirical questions." And I was listening to it live, and I heard Lindsay Hansen Park deconstruct it and blow it up live. She just stopped and started kind of almost yelling, "You ex-Mormons just want to deconstruct it, like not deconstruct. You guys want to empirically it's the opposite of deconstruction, as I say. You guys want to empirically criticize. You want to falsify. You guys want to falsify this stuff. We're not. This falsification is such a male way of being. This falsification or this viewing things like autistically history stuff is completely a male way of being, and us women, we just want to deconstruct it. We want to look at the identities. We want to look at the interactions and the oppressions and those types of things. And I remember DeLynn just stopping kind of dead in his tracks, not knowing what to do, and just going, "Oh, brilliant, brilliant. That's brilliant. That's brilliant." And it derailed the whole entire thing. I swear, you just imagine like his eyeballs going out to the side, repeating, "Brilliant, brilliant." And it's one of the only episodes they ever deleted. They also mentioned that they thought maybe it was ethically bad to have recorded that guy, although I think they had permission. But it was really because Lindsay derailed the thing. And so I have this clip of Kate Kelly kind of talking about this mode of thinking in the ex-Mormon world. And this is the last clip.
I think I do have some expertise in this area. I think, yeah, it's interesting to me because I think ex-Mormon men are ex-Mormons in general, honestly, are the worst people to me too. Ex-Mormons are the most vicious. Ex-Mormons do the craziest shit. Like ex-Mormons are the ones who like message me the worst things. Like ex-Mormons are the ones who track down my brother and dad and send them text message with the C word in them. Like people are cray. And I have a lot of theories about that. Wounded people trying to wound pretty much sums it up.
Okay.
But I think, particularly when it comes to men, like ex-Mormon men, I find they leave the patriarchy, the explicit patriarchy, the patriarchal order, and then they don't have this institution that gives them power. They don't have an institution that says like every room you're in, you're the leader of. Every, meeting you are at, you're the presider of. People don't defer to them in the same way in the outside world. And they really that's not the part of Mormonism they didn't like. The part of Mormonism they liked was the part that centered them, treated them special, gave them advantages, gave them authority, gave them power that they did not earn. So that part they actually liked. There are other things about it. And, you'll find women and men leave the church for different reasons, I find typically. Ex-Mormon men are like, in 1843.
It's real quick. There's a difference between men and women? Okay.
Like so-and-so said on page 29. Like, I'm like...
This is almost like exactly how Lindsay derailed that podcast.
What? Like, who cares? Like,
who cares? The CS answer is just a bunch of empirical questions, and she's like, what? Who cares? To their big get, you know what I mean? Just derailed it. Brilliant.
What is he? Who? Oliver Cowdery? What? Like, I don't care. And women, I find, there's a range, but women tend to leave because their lived experience is very bad. And that overall they're treated poorly by the institution or by individuals within the institution. And so I feel like ex-Mormon men are trying to like recreate the advantages they got by being part of a patriarchal system, but just not being Mormon anymore.
So that's a deconstruction of Larson and DeLynn and them, right? That's what I think it's one of the reasons why DeLynn doesn't want her around, because she started getting on this thing. I don't See, I don't know what happened with Lindsay and Delin. I do know that she had criticisms for him back in the day of being a person who likes to center himself around stuff. I don't think that's because he's white and male. I think that's because he's a narcissist. But the whole thing of what I've been trying to yell at ex-Mormons for all the time is the ones who aren't down with all the empiricism are not the Mormons. Mormons are into empiricism. Of course, there's some stuff in their beliefs that they take on faith or like there's parts of their religious life that doesn't go right with empiricism. But when they encounter the world, it's pure empiricism. They don't denigrate empiricism. And the people who go, like one of the things Daniel Dennett, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, who then became critical himself of Sam Harris, because Dennett was able to start seeing as well too the concept that religion might be adaptive. He started pointing to postmodernism. He brought up the thing that postmodernism is the acid without a container, because you put it in any container, it just burns right through the container, and it burns down to the ground, and it burns through everything. And deconstruction is the acid without container. There's nothing that shouldn't, even like we talked about before, that Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality is the whole construal of why wokeism can take the place of deconstruction, because it says you can't, the deconstruction stops with me because of my oppressed self, which is Nietzschean ressentiment. Oh, that was invented by an incel.
Have you heard any deconstructive arguments on the fact that there are dinosaur bones in the ground?
I don't know. There probably is one out there. The thing is, like,
I mean, I'm sure it goes to the hegemonic control of, like, with oil companies and that kind of stuff like that. I'm sure it'll boil down to that somehow. But
yeah, if you can,
I'm just saying. I'm making the point that from when you're talking, I was just sitting here thinking, like, about, it's interesting how, like, the way I look at it, I see empirical, like you said, see empirical things all around me, but where that doesn't necessarily meet together, like, say, for example, the idea of dinosaur bones. Well, I know they're in the ground, and the Bible doesn't really talk about that. And if you're taking literally the 6,000 years preceding Christ, when the world was formed, that doesn't really jive, and I understand that. But I don't necessarily think that it doesn't, and especially when you start understanding that the Bible is not just, I do like what Peterson's, what kind of view Peterson has brought to the table as far as, like, reading scripture.
Yeah, that's that, and I think he pulls that from Pajau, who we talked about. He was talking about symbolism. Look at the symbolism and this stuff. Yeah,
but in contrast, looking at postmodern, and deconstructive perspective, it's just like, where does it end up going? It doesn't just like Morgoth was talking about. It's like, we're just going to break the freaking violin.
So there's 3 arenas, if we're going to use the word postmodern, really. Or you can maybe talk about some postmodernism, but the you got pre-modern, modern, and postmodern. Enlightenment is the modern time, that's and the pre-modern time. This is one of the things that's funny about it, is so much of our, maybe Enlightenment's guilty of this, of our time frame nowadays, is to just completely crap on pre-modern thinkers. And that's one of the areas Camille Paglia is so famous for, is looking back at pre-modern thinkers and realizing there's way more intelligent thinking in that sort of magical worldview than you ever gave credit for. And that's actually one of the things Distributus gets really good at talking about. But there's a lot of people getting into that. Actually, even Pajau gets really good into talking about pre-modern thinking and how it wasn't stupid. It was actually very, very, very smart. And the modern era just got into, what stood out as most popular was kind of scientific thinking. And then the postmodern era got into, so the pre-modern era is, we can know, and we can know all sorts of stuff through magic. The modern era is we can know and know stuff through science, and the postmodern era is we can't know stuff, unless now that's coming out, unless we're an oppressed being. But the the deconstruction doesn't stop. It doesn't stop with you. It doesn't stop anywhere. And even those modern construals that try to make wokeism work, intersectionality is a construal to say you can't deconstruct me. That's what the concept of structural determinism is trying to claim.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also why it's used as a point of Kate Kelly from her structural determinism can have more access to a truth than the people trying to break down empirically what was correct or what wasn't correct. But it's just a different mode. It's a different mode of thinking, and it also has something behind it that is destructive. We're going to destroy this violin, and Morgoth's contention, my contention is you can't play the violin afterwards. Then you should continue on to his video, and he really kind of likens it to how things played out in Afghanistan, and it's going to play out more in our world because we're living in a time frame where people think deconstruction is the answer to utopia, to bring in the better thing, to reset everything, if I dare say that. Anyway, any last words?
No, I think you summed it up really well. Maybe this, worth getting into in a subsequent video, but just in context of, this is all anti-meaning.
Yeah.
Meaning is playing the
remove the meaning.
The meaning is the symphony. Meaning is Beethoven's Fifth.
Oh, we could get into
Deconstruction is busting it to crap.
We can get into how these same concepts go across all sorts of fields. Atonal music. That I have the whole entire video about how they even try to deconstruct music, and they deconstruct stories. They deconstruct whatever.
Break the narratives up. It's like
break the narratives up. But like the true deconstruction is leave it down to nihilism, not
exactly.
Reevaluate or falsify something.
That's the end point.
Yep.
But that's common sense. So it's
then the utopia will ensue.
Yeah.
So stop it. Or stop thinking it's smart. It's not smart. It's easy. Once you get like what the actual thing is, it's easy to do. This is what I was going to say. Half of the academic world, man, what's hard about it isn't deconstructing something. What's hard about it, you mentioned, is there a paper on dinosaurs or whatever? There's a paper. There's 40 papers somewhere. What's hard about it is finding the thing that somebody hasn't already done some sort of thing that they think they've figured it out yet.
I'm gonna have to look for the paper.
There will be one, and that's why
we'll talk about it.
And one of the other ones, Flip talked about Kate Kelly's talking crap on Lynn Larson making money, and then Flip says, "How do you make your money?" And I say, "You can't deconstruct her. There's a paper. There's a paper somewhere." But there's I remember watching this PBS video one time, and this lady came out saying people think white supremacy in the white world is better because all the old ancient statues are white, and they weren't actually white. They had paint back in the day. And I remember watching that and saying, I bet you there was a moment where you were sitting in your office at a school. You said, I've tried to find something. They've already talked about peanut butter. They've already talked about SpongeBob SquarePants. They've already talked about what? Wait a minute, Greek statues are white. I can make the assertion that people are into white supremacy because those are white. Wait a minute. Here's the big test. Did somebody else already write it? Please. And then type it up to nobody's written it. Eureka! I'm gonna be on PBS. Nobody's written that one yet. Like I promise you, there was a moment of that because it wasn't that you came up with the idea; it's that nobody else had yet. And so it's like, whew, this stuff's old. It's old and dumb and boring and easy.
Has anybody started taking down Ronald McDonald statues at McDonald's Playlands?
Yeah, I mean, at McDonald's, like that stuff's corporate, man. But at the same time, too, most of the lefties have had a Hegelian process done on them. That's part of the that's the continued video of Morgoth's thing about how Afghanistan is how the Hegelian process turned all you former skeptical of war lefties into that's what the idea of neoliberalism is, that we'll take up your banners to just keep being neocons. If that makes any sense. But so those papers, well, like I said, there's a million of them, and I said in another video that like I can offer the concept that I'm a witness to having read so many different papers that Lindsay and Pluckrose have also read, and they're accurate to the thing that I read as well. But one of the areas I think I've read more than them is I think I've read more crap level papers. I bet you I've read more papers done by like some master's level knucklehead. Because when I was in school, I read through this stuff because I was trying to figure out how to write a paper myself.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense. And so I read tons of them. And then since then there was this Twitter channel called Real Peer Review where they just constantly popped up just different papers by another idiot, and I'd read them and like, what is this stuff? But the stuff's endless and it's easy. You want to know what's hard? Construction. And if you're living inside of a constructed thing, Kevin's the construction guy here.
That's right.
And if you're living inside of a constructed thing that's already constructed, maybe be a bit careful about deconstructing because the constructing part's harder.
Yeah. So all you Marxists like Dylan and Larson, do you live in a home? Yeah. How that mortgage treating you?
Yeah. Oh, that's all capitalism, man. Burn it down.
Yeah.
Right on. Let's call it.
Word up.
Good and quick.
Peace.